Tonight, we drift into another mystery of the unknown. Close your eyes and let your thoughts fade as we explore the gentle question: could the moon be something more than it seems? You're safe here. Just relax and let sleep carry you. Chapter 1. A coincidence too precise: the eclipses and size alignment. Ask anyone what makes the moon special, and they might mention its beauty, its pull on the tides, or its mysterious glow on a clear night. But for those who believe the moon might not be what it seems, those who think it could have been placed there by an advanced intelligence, there's one detail that stands out above all: the way it perfectly matches the size of the sun during a total eclipse. It's almost too perfect. In fact, some would say it is. When we stand on Earth and look up during a total solar eclipse, the moon fits exactly over the sun, blocking all its light except for a glowing halo known as the corona. This isn't something that happens anywhere else in the solar system. No other known planet has a moon that can do this. The sun is about 400 times bigger than the moon, but it's also about 400 times farther away. The result? They look exactly the same size in our sky. That's the only reason total eclipses are possible. Mainstream scientists explain this as a coincidence, just a lucky alignment that happens to exist right now. According to them, the moon is gradually moving away from Earth, and millions of years from now, total eclipses won't be possible. They say we just happen to live in the brief window of history when the moon and the sun appear the same size from Earth. That may be true, but for believers, this explanation feels a little too convenient. Think about it. Out of all the sizes and distances that the moon and sun could have, they just happen to line up this perfectly, and during the exact era that humans are around to witness it. To some, that's not just luck, that's planning. Now, let's be clear. Most people who believe the moon was placed here don't claim to have all the answers. They're not all saying little green men flew it into orbit. But they do think the moon's behavior, size, and impact on Earth are suspiciously well suited for life. And the eclipse is just the beginning. Take a step back and look at how the moon affects our planet. Its gravitational pull controls our tides, which in turn shape coastlines, nourish marine ecosystems, and may have played a role in the development of life itself. But more importantly, the moon helps stabilize Earth's tilt. Without it, our planet would wobble far more, and that would lead to extreme climate swings. Swings that might have made complex life, or civilization as we know it, much harder to develop. Is it possible this is all just a happy accident? Maybe. But some argue it makes more sense to at least consider that the moon was intentionally put in place to support life on Earth. Its size, distance, orbit, and timing all seem to work together in ways that benefit us. Let's talk about that orbit for a second. The moon is what's called tidally locked, which means it always shows the same face to Earth. We never see the far side unless we use spacecraft. That in itself is a rare phenomenon, especially combined with its nearly circular orbit. Most moons, even in our own solar system, have more stretched or elliptical paths. Ours is almost perfectly round. And then there's the fact that Earth's moon is huge. Compared to our planet, it's the biggest moon in the solar system. Mars has 2 moons, but they're tiny and oddly shaped, like captured asteroids. Jupiter and Saturn have dozens of moons, but none of them are even close to the size of Earth's in proportion to their planet. Our moon is 1/4 the size of Earth, a massive satellite by cosmic standards. Why is ours so different? Mainstream science offers the giant impact theory to explain it. Supposedly, A Mars-sized object slammed into Earth billions of years ago, and the debris eventually formed the moon. But there are problems with this idea. For one, the moon's composition is almost identical to Earth's outer layers. If it were created from a collision with another planet, we'd expect to see more evidence of that planet's materials in the moon. But we don't. Those who believe in artificial placement aren't saying they can prove who put it there or why, but they argue that if every mainstream theory has serious flaws, then maybe it's time to start asking different questions. What if the moon wasn't the result of a collision? What if it was brought here or built? This idea might sound extreme, but it's not without precedent in human thinking. Many ancient cultures had stories about the moon arriving in the sky, or times when it wasn't there. The Zulu people of Africa, for instance, have oral traditions that talk about a time before the moon existed. Greek philosopher Aristotle even referenced a group of people called the Proselenes, those who lived before the moon. Are these just myths? Possibly. But they could also be cultural memories of a real event that happened so long ago we've forgotten the details. Of course, not everyone agrees with these interpretations. Scientists and skeptics argue that we're just seeing patterns where none exist. They point out that in a universe as massive as ours, strange alignments are bound to happen somewhere. Maybe we're just lucky. Maybe we're here to notice the eclipse because the conditions that make it possible are the same ones that allowed intelligent life to evolve. It's called the anthropic principle, the idea that we can only observe a universe where conditions support our existence. That's a fair point. But for those who remain skeptical of the official story, it still doesn't explain everything. It doesn't explain the moon's perfect positioning. It doesn't explain the lack of impactor materials. And it doesn't explain why ancient stories from around the world speak of a time before the moon was in the sky. Believers aren't necessarily trying to overturn science. Many of them just want to widen the conversation. Instead of assuming the moon's perfect size and distance are meaningless coincidences, they ask, what if they aren't? At the very least, it's worth considering. If something as massive and influential as the moon is just there, and if it turns out to have been placed or created by someone or something, shouldn't we want to know? That's where this journey begins, with a question that sounds simple. Why does the moon perfectly cover the sun during an eclipse? But that question opens the door to others. Questions about the moon's origin, its purpose, its makeup, and possibly even its builders. In the next chapter, we'll dig into what might be inside the moon itself. Because believe it or not, the idea that the moon is hollow, or at least partially hollow, is not just science fiction. It's something that's been proposed by scientists, supported by seismic data, and taken seriously by some of the people who've studied the moon the most. Let's go deeper. Literally. Chapter 2. The Seismic Mystery. Why the Moon Rings Like a Bell. What would you think if you tapped on something and it sounded hollow? Most of us would assume there was empty space inside. Now imagine doing that to something as massive as the moon, and it echoes like a bell. That's exactly what some of the early seismic experiments during the Apollo missions seemed to suggest, and it's one of the reasons believers in the artificial moon theory started paying closer attention. When NASA's Apollo 12 mission ended, the astronauts deliberately crashed the lunar module onto the moon's surface. Seismic sensors left behind recorded something unexpected. The moon vibrated for over an hour. One NASA scientist even described it as ringing like a bell. That same kind of long-lasting tremor happened again when Apollo 13's third stage hit the moon even harder. It wasn't just a quick shake. The moon vibrated in a way that surprised everyone. To the average person, this may not sound like a big deal. But for those who believe the moon isn't just a natural rock in the sky, this was one of the first signs that something strange might be going on inside it. Mainstream scientists offered explanations. They said the moon's interior is dry, rigid, and made up of different materials than Earth. Because it lacks water and has a fractured outer shell, vibrations don't get absorbed quickly. Instead, they bounce around longer, making it ring. That may well be the case. But believers still find it hard to ignore the idea that the moon might be hollow, or at least partially hollow. Why does that matter? Because if the moon is hollow, it raises serious questions about how it formed. Most natural celestial bodies, planets, moons, asteroids, aren't hollow. They're solid or layered based on pressure and gravity. A hollow object that size would go against what we understand about physics and natural formation. And then there's the bigger question. What if it's not just hollow, but constructed? Some early proponents of this idea included two Soviet scientists, Mikhail Vasin and Alexander Sherbakov, who wrote a paper in 1970 called "Is the Moon the Creation of Intelligence?" In it, they proposed that the moon could be a massive, ancient spacecraft or observation post placed in orbit by unknown beings. Their theory was speculative, but it was published in a respected journal and taken seriously at the time. Skeptics argue that this is just science fiction dressed up as science. They point to newer data from seismometers and lunar missions that suggest the moon has a partially molten core, not a hollow one. But even today, no one has fully mapped the moon's interior. We've only scratched the surface, literally. Without deep drilling or more advanced equipment, much of the moon's internal structure remains a mystery. Believers also point to the way the moon behaves during quakes, called moonquakes. Unlike earthquakes, which are often sharp and short, moonquakes can last for hours. Some are caused by meteorite impacts or temperature changes, but the duration and intensity of some of these quakes seem odd to many who study them. There's also the mystery of why some of these seismic waves travel so far. On Earth, our molten interior absorbs shock waves, but on the moon, they appear to bounce and echo. For those who already suspect the moon is more than it seems, this kind of behavior fits their theory. And then there are the questions about the moon's density. It's less dense than Earth, which some believe could be another hint that it isn't solid all the way through. Maybe it's filled with voids or chambers. Or maybe, just maybe, it's built that way. Of course, there's no direct evidence of alien technology inside the moon. No wires, no engines, no control panels, at least, not that we know of. But believers argue that if it was placed here by an ancient intelligence, it might be millions of years old. Any technology would likely be deeply buried or long inactive. And if someone wanted to hide their work, they'd do a good job of it. In the end, what we know for sure is limited. The moon's interior remains mostly unexplored. The seismic data we do have has raised more questions than answers. And while mainstream science has reasonable explanations for the moon's long-lasting vibrations, there's still room for doubt. For some, that doubt is enough to keep looking. Because if the moon is hollow or contains something unexpected, it could change everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe. In the next chapter, we'll explore where the moon might have come from in the first place. Because whether natural or not, its origin story is far from settled. Chapter 3. The moon shouldn't be there. It might sound strange to say it, but some people genuinely believe that the moon shouldn't be there. Not in the way it is, not where it is, and certainly not doing what it's doing. For those who hold this view, the mystery isn't just about how the moon got here, but whether it even could have, under natural conditions. And surprisingly, even among mainstream scientists, there's no universally agreed upon explanation for the moon's origin. That fact alone keeps the door open for alternative theories. Let's start with what science has proposed. There are three main theories about how the moon came to be. First, the fission theory, which suggests that the moon was once part of the Earth and somehow split off, possibly from a violent spin or explosion. Second, the capture theory, which claims the moon formed somewhere else and got caught in Earth's gravity. And third, the most widely accepted theory today, the giant impact hypothesis, which says a Mars-sized body hit the early Earth, and the debris eventually clumped together to form the moon. Each of these theories tries to explain the moon's unusual characteristics, but none of them do it perfectly. In fact, all of them have major gaps that haven't been resolved even after decades of study. Take the fission theory. If the moon did break off from Earth, you'd expect it to share Earth's composition, and to some extent, it does. Lunar rocks brought back from the Apollo missions show isotopic similarities to Earth's crust. But there are problems. For one, Earth would have needed to be spinning incredibly fast to fling off a chunk that large, fast enough that the Earth itself might not have held together. That makes this explanation hard to accept. Then there's the capture theory. If the moon formed somewhere else and Earth's gravity snagged it, that would explain why it might be different from Earth. But capturing a large, fast-moving object into a near-perfect circular orbit isn't easy. In fact, it's incredibly difficult. It would require just the right conditions and a precise loss of energy, something that almost never happens in space. It's a scenario that looks more like threading a cosmic needle. That's why most scientists now prefer the giant impact hypothesis. It has its appeal. A dramatic collision, debris flying into space, and a new moon forming from the rubble. But even this theory has serious issues. One of the biggest is that the moon's composition is almost identical to Earth's outer layers, not just in terms of rock types, but even the oxygen isotopes. If another planet had slammed into Earth, we'd expect the moon to be made of a mix of both bodies. But the expected foreign material just isn't there. That's where the believers raise their eyebrows. If none of the natural explanations fit, maybe we're asking the wrong questions. Maybe the moon didn't form from Earth. Maybe it wasn't captured. Maybe it wasn't born out of a cosmic accident at all. Maybe it was placed. This doesn't mean rejecting science. In fact, most believers in the artificial moon theory use scientific findings as the foundation for their questions. They look at the data and simply ask, what if there's another explanation that we haven't considered because it doesn't fit our assumptions? Here's another thing to think about. The moon is huge relative to Earth. It's about 1/4 the size of our planet, a much larger ratio than any other moon and planet pairing in the solar system. Most moons are tiny compared to their planets. Our moon is an exception. It's big enough to affect Earth's tides, climate stability, and even the length of our days. It's had a massive impact on life here, quite literally. Now consider this. The moon's orbit is almost perfectly circular, which is unusual. Many natural satellites have slightly elliptical orbits, meaning they move closer and farther from their planet, but not the moon. It stays at just the right distance to create those total solar eclipses we talked about in Chapter 1, and that distance is slowly increasing at a steady rate. Not random, not erratic, steady. All of this has led some to ask, with sincerity, whether the moon was engineered or at least influenced, by some kind of intelligence. Maybe not recently, and maybe not by creatures we'd even recognize. But the idea is that the moon's presence might not be a fluke. It might be part of something much bigger. There's even support for this kind of thinking from the past. In 1970, two Soviet scientists, Mikhail Vasin and Alexander Sherbakov, published a paper titled, "Is the Moon the Creation of Intelligence?" in a respected academic journal. They weren't fringe theorists. They were members of the USSR's space program. In their paper, they speculated that the moon might be a hollowed-out planetoid, possibly a massive spacecraft or observation station placed in Earth's orbit. Of course, the mainstream scientific community didn't accept their theory, and it's still widely dismissed today. But the fact that their work was taken seriously enough to be published at all says something. It shows that even among scientists, there's been room, however small, for the idea that the moon might not be what it seems. To be clear, no one has found a control room or engine buried under the lunar surface. There's no concrete evidence of technology. But when people say the moon shouldn't be there, they mean that its existence is just too odd, too convenient, and too beneficial to be purely coincidental. Even today, we don't fully understand how the moon affects life on Earth. We know it influences the tides and helps stabilize the planet's tilt. But what about its effects on biology, behavior, and culture? Ancient civilizations timed their calendars to the moon. Some believed it affected mood, fertility, and growth. Maybe they were onto something. And if the moon really does play that large of a role in supporting life on Earth, then shouldn't we at least consider the possibility that it was placed here deliberately? After all, if you wanted to make a planet livable and keep it that way for millions of years, wouldn't you put something like the moon in place to help regulate it? Believers don't claim to have all the answers, but they do believe that the current explanations fall short. And when you stack up all the oddities, the moon's size, its orbit, its effect on Earth, its suspiciously Earth-like composition, it starts to look less like a natural satellite and more like a puzzle we haven't yet solved. Maybe the moon shouldn't be there, but it is. And that fact alone keeps the questions coming. In the next chapter, we'll explore stories from the distant past, tales passed down by ancient people who may have remembered a time before the moon appeared in the sky. Whether these are myths or memories, they offer one more clue in the search for the moon's true origin. Chapter 4. Myths of a time before the moon. What if the moon hasn't always been there? It might sound unbelievable, but some ancient stories from around the world suggest just that. These aren't the tales of science fiction writers, but oral traditions and historical records passed down through generations. To those who believe the moon may have been placed in orbit by an outside intelligence, these ancient accounts are more than just myths. They might be distant memories of a time before the moon appeared in the sky. Let's start in Africa. The Zulu people of South Africa have long told stories of a time before the moon. According to some of their traditions, two brothers named Wawan and Mpanku stole the moon and brought it into the sky. The moon, they say, was originally a giant egg that was hollowed out and rolled into place. It's an oddly specific and mechanical-sounding story, especially for something that supposedly happened long ago. Greek writings also mention people who lived before the moon. The ancient Greek historian Apollonius of Rhodes referred to the proselyns, literally, those who existed before the moon. Aristotle, too, acknowledged the legend. Plutarch and Lucian wrote about Arcadians, an ancient people who were said to have lived in a time before the moon hung in the sky. These weren't fringe myths. They were part of the historical record. Across the ocean, similar themes appear in pre-Columbian America. The Tiwanaku culture of South America had myths that described an era when the moon was not yet in the sky. The ancient Colombians of the Bogotá Highlands also had a story in which the moon appeared after a great flood, implying a major celestial change in their recent memory. So what do we make of all this? Mainstream historians and anthropologists usually interpret these stories symbolically. To them, before the moon could mean before time was measured, or before the current age. Maybe the moon represents a new era, and these myths are about cultural change, not astronomy. But from a believer's point of view, the similarities in these stories, across cultures that had no contact with each other, raise eyebrows. Why would people on different continents, living in vastly different environments, all have tales of a sky that was once moonless? What are the odds of that being a coincidence? It's especially intriguing when you consider that oral traditions often preserve memories of real events, even if the details change over time. Some cultures remembered floods that align with real geological evidence. Others remembered volcanic eruptions that modern scientists have confirmed. So, is it possible that some cultures also remembered the arrival of the moon? If we follow that thread, we have to ask, how recent could the moon's arrival be? Scientists say the moon is over 4 billion years old. But if the moon was placed, or repositioned more recently, the act could have left a cultural mark without necessarily changing the age of the moon's material. In other words, the moon could be ancient, but its presence in Earth's sky might be more recent. That idea might sound far-fetched, but even in modern times, we can move satellites into orbit. If a civilization far more advanced than ours existed millions of years ago, maybe they did something similar with the moon on a much larger scale. Another point that gets brought up is the sudden emergence of agricultural societies. Around 10,000 years ago, human life shifted dramatically. We went from being hunters and gatherers to building settlements, growing crops, and studying the stars. Some researchers, especially those open to alternative theories, wonder if the moon's stable light and influence played a role in this shift. Could the moon have been introduced to help stabilize Earth's climate, regulate tides, or mark time for early societies? The moon's gravitational pull creates tides that may have shaped coastal ecosystems, which are believed to be crucial in the development of early complex life. The moon also helps stabilize Earth's tilt, reducing wild swings in climate that could make long-term agriculture difficult. It's not hard to imagine that early people, seeing this new light in the sky, would have woven it into their stories and remembered the time before. Skeptics, of course, offer valid counterpoints. They say that myths aren't meant to be taken literally, and that stories about the moon may simply reflect the awe it inspires. It's a symbol, a metaphor, a poetic device, not a record of real events. But not all believers are convinced by that. After all, the moon is unlike anything else in our sky. It's unusually large, perfectly placed, and deeply connected to life on Earth. When multiple ancient cultures describe a time before it was there, maybe we should pause before brushing it off. It's also worth noting that ancient people weren't ignorant. They built calendars, observed eclipses, and tracked planets. Their knowledge of the sky was often surprisingly accurate. So if they say something changed, if they say the moon arrived, perhaps we should listen more carefully. Even today, we don't fully understand why certain myths appear so frequently in different parts of the world. Are they just coincidence? collective imagination, or something more? To someone who believes the moon might have been placed deliberately, these stories are not proof, but they are clues. Clues that suggest a memory of something big, something that changed the sky and maybe changed the world. In the next chapter, we'll shift from stories to science again as we look at the moon's strange orbit and behavior. Because whether you think the moon arrived naturally or not, the way it moves is unlike anything else we know, and that's worth exploring. Chapter 5. The lunar orbit. Too stable? Too perfect? There's something about the moon's orbit that just doesn't sit right with some people. It's not just that it orbits Earth, it's how it does it. To the casual observer, the moon simply rises and sets like the sun, a familiar and comforting sight. But to those who've looked a bit deeper, the way the moon moves seems almost too perfect. Let's start with one of the most commonly cited oddities. The moon is tidally locked. This means it always shows the same face to Earth. We never get to see the far side unless we send a spacecraft around to photograph it. While this is explainable through gravitational interactions, called tidal forces, over millions of years, the result is still striking. Think about it. Out of all the ways the moon could rotate, it just so happens to rotate at the exact speed needed to keep one side facing Earth at all times. That's pretty remarkable. Now add this. The moon's orbit around Earth is nearly a perfect circle. Most orbits in space are elliptical. They have an oval shape. Planets orbit the sun in slightly stretched out loops. Moons orbit planets in slightly stretched patterns. But the moon's orbit is one of the most circular of any natural satellite in the solar system. It's not a perfect circle, but it's close. So close that it raises eyebrows among those who suspect intelligent design. Believers in the artificial moon theory point to this as evidence that the moon was positioned intentionally. A circular orbit creates predictable gravitational effects. It keeps Earth's rotation stable. It maintains consistent tides, and it creates a sense of regularity that has shaped life and civilization. Mainstream scientists acknowledge the moon's stabilizing effect. They agree that it plays a vital role in keeping Earth's axial tilt steady, which helps maintain a relatively stable climate. Without the moon, Earth's tilt might wobble much more, leading to extreme and unpredictable climate changes over long periods. That would make it harder for life, especially intelligent life, to evolve and flourish. Here's where the conspiracy theory creeps in. Some believe that this stabilization wasn't accidental. If a civilization wanted to make Earth more habitable, or keep it habitable, it would need a way to prevent wild climate swings. Enter the moon. In this view, the moon wasn't just placed to look pretty or help us track time. It was engineered to help Earth thrive. There's another strange detail that catches the attention of believers. The moon is slowly moving away from Earth. This has been measured using laser reflectors left on the lunar surface by Apollo astronauts. Every year, the moon drifts about 3.8 centimeters farther from us. Scientists say this is caused by the transfer of Earth's rotational energy to the moon's orbit via tidal friction. That's the official explanation. But the regularity of this drift is curious. It's not chaotic. It's not speeding up or slowing down wildly. It's consistent, almost as if it was programmed. Believers wonder whether this steady rate is just another layer of artificial design. Maybe the moon's orbit is being subtly adjusted over time, or maybe it was placed with such precision that even its long-term movement was calculated in advance. Now consider how precisely the moon matches the sun's size in our sky, which we discussed in Chapter 1. This only works because of the moon's distance from Earth If the moon were just a bit farther or closer, we wouldn't get total eclipses. And the fact that we do, at the same time that intelligent life happens to be here to observe it, feels suspiciously timed to some. Skeptics, of course, offer solid counterpoints. Tidal locking is a well-understood process. The moon started out spinning much faster, but over millions of years, Earth's gravity slowed it down until it matched its orbit. A nearly circular orbit can result from gravitational interactions with the Earth and Sun, and the moon's slow drift is a natural consequence of physics. There's no need, they argue, to invoke aliens or ancient engineers. But for believers, the accumulation of coincidences is what keeps the theory alive. It's not just one thing, it's all the things, layered on top of each other. The tidally locked rotation, the circular orbit, the stabilizing effect, the perfect size and distance, the precise rate of drift. Taken individually, maybe they're just quirks of nature, but taken together, it starts to feel like a pattern. Some even suggest that the moon could be acting as a kind of balancing tool, or even a control device. In this theory, the moon isn't just stabilizing Earth by accident. It's part of a larger system. Maybe it was meant to keep Earth's environment stable enough for life to develop. Or maybe it's still serving a purpose we haven't yet discovered. And here's another thing to think about. If you were designing an artificial satellite to observe or regulate a planet, you'd probably want it in a fixed, predictable orbit. You'd want it to stay steady, always facing the same side, always moving in sync. That way, your instruments, or whatever you've placed inside, could focus on one spot. The moon does exactly that. Of course, there's no direct evidence that the moon is artificial. There are no lights, engines, or visible mechanisms. But to believers, the orbit itself is the clue. It's the fingerprint of a greater design. Even ancient cultures seem to notice something special about the moon's movement. They built monuments that tracked its cycles. They celebrated its phases. They recorded eclipses and lunar alignments. They knew, instinctively or otherwise, that the moon wasn't just another rock in the sky. It was a clock, a compass, a guardian. So, is the moon's orbit natural or unnatural? Is it the product of billions of years of gravitational fine-tuning? Or is it the result of intelligent design, an ancient gift or tool left behind for reasons we don't yet understand? The truth may still be hidden, but the questions remain. Because even if everything about the moon's orbit can be explained by physics, that doesn't mean it wasn't planned. Physics could be the tool, not the origin. In the next chapter, we'll dig into the moon's actual makeup, not just how it moves, but what it's made of, because there are some strange materials up there, and some of them don't quite belong. Chapter 6. Strange Elements and Materials in Lunar Soil. For anyone who's ever stared up at the moon and thought, it's just a big, dusty rock, you might want to think again. What we've learned about the moon's surface and soil, especially from samples collected during the Apollo missions, has left many scratching their heads. Even some scientists admit that the moon is chemically weirder than it should be. And for those who believe the moon may have been placed, or even built, by an advanced intelligence, the unusual materials found in its soil are another reason to keep asking questions. Let's start with something simple: titanium. The moon has a lot of it. Some lunar rocks contain titanium at concentrations far higher than what we typically find on Earth. On our planet, titanium is rare and valuable, used in aircraft, spacecraft, and other high-strength applications. On the moon, it seems unusually common, especially in areas like the Mare Tranquillitatis, where Apollo 11 landed. Mainstream scientists explain this by saying the moon's volcanic activity, billions of years ago, could have concentrated titanium in certain places. Fair enough. But believers point out that titanium is one of the strongest and most corrosion-resistant metals we know. If someone were designing an artificial shell or structure to withstand time, radiation, and extreme temperature swings, titanium would be an excellent material to use. Then there's the matter of unusual isotopes. Apollo samples reportedly contain trace amounts of uranium-236 and neptunium-237. These are radioactive elements that don't naturally occur in significant amounts on Earth. In fact, uranium-236 is typically a byproduct of nuclear reactions, not something you'd expect to find just lying around. Neptunium-237 has to be created in a lab or inside a nuclear reactor. So what are they doing on the moon? Some skeptics argue that these readings could be due to contamination, either during collection or testing. That's possible. But for believers, the presence of even tiny amounts of such elements raises questions. Could these be remnants of ancient technology? Debris from an event long forgotten? Or were they put there for a specific reason? It doesn't stop there. The soil on the moon is covered in tiny glass beads. These aren't beads like you'd find in a craft store, but spherical bits of glass created by intense heat, likely from meteor impacts. That part's accepted science. But the sheer quantity of them, and how evenly they're spread across the surface, is curious. Glass is often associated with high-energy processes. Could some of the glass have come from artificial activity? Explosions? Even controlled construction? And here's a detail that often surprises people. Some moon rocks are slightly magnetic. That's strange, because the moon doesn't have a global magnetic field like Earth does. So how did those rocks become magnetized? Scientists think that maybe the moon had a magnetic field billions of years ago that eventually died out. But others wonder if the magnetism is a leftover sign of technological processes, or the result of embedded materials we don't yet understand. One of the most talked about anomalies in moon material has to do with its age. Some lunar rocks appear to be older than any rocks found on Earth. One Apollo 16 sample was dated at around 4.46 billion years old, which makes it older than most models of the moon's formation predict. If the moon came from the Earth, or from a collision with another object, how could parts of it be older than Earth's crust? Of course, there are mainstream explanations. The moon cooled faster because it's smaller, allowing ancient crust to survive, and the dating techniques have margins of error. But still, it's another piece of the puzzle that doesn't quite fit. Let's also talk about the dust. Lunar dust is extremely fine and sharp, almost like powdered glass. Astronauts said it clung to everything. It got into suits, into instruments, even into their lungs. It's so abrasive that it can wear down materials over time. And yet, it's unlike the dust we find here on Earth, which tends to be rounded by wind and water. Lunar dust hasn't been weathered. Some researchers speculate that it might contain compounds or materials formed under unusual conditions, possibly even conditions created rather than natural. Now, none of this proves the moon is artificial, but to a curious mind, it adds up. High-strength metals, unusual radioactive isotopes, mysterious magnetism, excessive glass, and an aggressive, unnatural kind of dust. All of these things are real and documented. The debate is about what they mean. Believers suggest a few possibilities. One is that the moon is partly hollow and contains a metallic structure beneath the surface. Another theory is that it's an ancient artifact, maybe even a spacecraft, disguised as a moon. Some think the strange materials could be part of internal shielding, energy systems, or structural support. Others believe these substances are the debris of a civilization that once used the moon and left behind traces of their work. Skeptics, of course, argue that this is all overthinking. The moon is a natural object, and its weird materials can all be explained by its volcanic history, its lack of atmosphere, and billions of years of meteorite impacts. They point out that lunar geology is still a developing field, and we shouldn't jump to conclusions just because something seems odd at first glance. But for believers, that's exactly the point. There are too many odd things, and if our scientific understanding of the moon is still incomplete, then we should be open to all possibilities, including the ones that don't fit neatly into accepted models. Even NASA has called the moon a more complex and enigmatic body than we imagined. That's a quote from one of their own publications. So maybe, just maybe, the strange materials in lunar soil are trying to tell us something. Maybe they're the breadcrumbs leading us to a bigger truth. In the next chapter, we'll look at what both the Soviets and NASA discovered, and possibly concealed, about the moon. Because sometimes, the most curious thing isn't what's found, but what isn't talked about. Chapter 7. The Soviet and NASA Anomalies. For most people, space exploration is a story of triumph. The moon landings, the rocket launches, the brave astronauts, it's all part of the proud legacy of science and discovery. But behind the headlines and historic moments, there are odd reports, missing data, and quiet details that have led some to believe there's more to the moon story than we've been told. And both the United States and the Soviet Union, the two major players in the space race, have their share of unanswered questions. Let's begin with the Soviets. In 1970, two Soviet scientists, Mikhail Vasin and Alexander Sherbakov, published a paper in the journal Sputnik titled, "Is the Moon the Creation of Intelligence?" These weren't fringe writers or science fiction authors. They were respected members of the USSR's Academy of Sciences. In their article, they proposed that the moon could be an ancient spacecraft or hollowed-out planetoid, possibly placed in orbit by unknown beings. To be clear, this wasn't an official Soviet government position, but the fact that such a theory appeared in a state-approved publication during the Cold War, when every word was closely monitored, was surprising. It gave legitimacy to the idea that the moon might not be entirely natural, and it encouraged others to look more closely at the anomalies. One of those anomalies was how quiet the Soviet program became when it came to manned moon missions. While they had great success with robotic probes, like Luna 2, the first human-made object to impact the moon, they never followed through with a crewed landing. Some believers speculate that the Soviets discovered something unusual, something that convinced them not to send people there. Now, turn to the United States. The Apollo program is one of NASA's greatest achievements. But it too has its mysteries. For instance, many of the original moon landing tapes were lost or recorded over. That includes the original slow scan footage from Apollo 11. NASA later admitted this, but explained it as a cost-saving mistake during a time when videotape was expensive. Still, for such a monumental event, losing the highest quality footage struck many as odd. Then there's the story of Apollo 17, the last crewed mission to the moon. During the mission, there was a 4-minute gap in live communication between the astronauts and Houston. NASA says the silence was just a technical glitch, but some claim it was edited out because of what the astronauts saw: lights or objects on the lunar surface that couldn't be explained. This claim comes largely from whistleblowers and conspiracy theorists, but it's been repeated so often that it's now a staple of moon-related speculation. Another strange case is the music heard by the Apollo 10 crew while orbiting the far side of the moon. In audio released decades later, the astronauts talk about hearing a kind of whistling or outer space music. NASA eventually said it was likely radio interference. But even the astronauts at the time sounded surprised and a bit unsettled by the sound. For believers, it was another hint that the moon wasn't as empty and quiet as we'd been led to believe. Then there's the topic of photographs. NASA has released thousands of images from the Apollo missions and later probes. But some researchers claim that a number of these photos show artificial-looking objects, structures, towers, or shadows that don't quite match the surrounding terrain. NASA attributes these to image artifacts, lighting angles, or camera glitches. But for those who believe in an artificial moon, the idea that some features might have been edited, blurred, or left unexplained is not out of the question. Whistleblowers have added fuel to the fire. One of the most well-known is Carl Wolf, a former U.S. Air Force technician. In the 1960s, Wolf was working at a NASA-related facility when he claims he was shown photographs from the moon's dark side. Photos that, according to him, showed artificial structures. He described them as buildings, towers, and domes. Wolf went public with his story in the late 1990s and stood by his claims until his death in 2018. There's also Donna Hare, a former NASA contractor who worked in photo labs. She says she witnessed images being airbrushed to remove unidentified objects, both in Earth orbit and on the moon. Like Wolf, she claims there was a culture of secrecy and intimidation surrounding anything that didn't fit the official narrative. Of course, skeptics argue that stories like these are unreliable. Human memory is fallible. Whistleblowers may be misinformed, exaggerating, or seeking attention. And while that might be true in some cases, the number of similar stories over the decades keeps curiosity alive. Another oddity, the Clementine mission. In 1994, the U.S. military and NASA launched a joint mission to map the moon. It photographed the entire surface, except for certain areas on the far side. Some of the image data from those zones was lost, corrupted, or never released. Again, technical glitches are the official reason, but when paired with other anomalies, some wonder if those areas contain things we weren't meant to see. One more point that believers raise: the shift in focus. After Apollo 17, no humans returned to the moon, not even during the boom of technology in the 1980s and 1990s. For something once so important, the sudden lack of interest seemed strange. NASA said it was due to cost and public disinterest, but believers suggest a different reason. Maybe we found something and decided it was better to stay away. Now, to be fair, space exploration is risky and expensive. Governments shift focus all the time. But when you add up the missing footage, the unexplained sounds, the strange photos, the sudden silence from the Soviets, and the testimonies from insiders, it does start to feel like there's a story beneath the story. This doesn't mean everything is a cover-up. It doesn't mean aliens were discovered and hidden from the public. But it does suggest that maybe not everything went according to plan. Maybe we encountered things we weren't ready to explain, or chose not to. For those who believe the moon may have been placed there, these gaps and silences are not accidents. They're part of a bigger pattern, a pattern that hints at secrets, whether ancient or modern, hiding in plain sight. In the next chapter, we'll explore one of the most controversial ideas of all, that there may be actual structures, towers, domes, and more, still standing on the moon today. Chapter 8: Strange Structures on the Moon. From a distance, the moon looks barren, just a gray, dusty sphere pockmarked by craters. But some who've taken a closer look at the thousands of photos released by NASA and other space agencies claim there might be more to see. Over the decades, amateur analysts, researchers, and even former insiders have pointed out shapes and shadows in lunar images that don't look like natural formations. They speak of towers, domes, tunnels, and even what appear to be buildings. Could there be structures on the moon? And if so, who put them there, and why? Let's start with some of the most well-known claims. One of the most cited structures is the so-called shard, a tall, spire-like object photographed during the Apollo 10 mission. It appears to rise vertically from the moon's surface and casts a long, narrow shadow. Some say it looks like a natural rock formation. Others claim it's too straight, too vertical, and too isolated to be natural. Then there's the tower in Sinus Midi, allegedly spotted in a NASA image showing a massive vertical column estimated by some to be over a mile high. Its shadow, its geometry, and its scale are all sources of debate. Some argue it's just an image artifact or a photographic glitch. But believers see in it the possibility of an old, alien-made structure. Something abandoned, perhaps, but still standing. Another intriguing anomaly is the castle, a name given to what appears to be a cluster of objects hanging above the moon's surface in Apollo 10 imagery. Some claim it resembles a floating structure, maybe tethered, maybe suspended, but definitely not part of the rocky landscape. NASA has never officially addressed it in detail, leading to further speculation. Skeptics often write these off as pareidolia, the human tendency to see patterns or familiar shapes where none exist. Just like seeing faces in clouds or animals in rock formations, they argue that people are simply projecting meaning onto random shapes, and in many cases, that's entirely possible. But not everyone is convinced it's that simple. Some researchers have used software to analyze the geometry of these anomalies and claim to find evidence of right angles, parallel lines, and symmetrical layouts, features rarely found in natural geological formations. Even tiny differences in light and shadow, they say, can reveal depth and shape inconsistent with typical lunar geology. The moon's surface is also riddled with what look like entrances or cave mouths. While scientists believe many of these are collapsed lava tubes, hollow tunnels formed by ancient volcanic activity, some believers suggest that these openings could be artificial. Perhaps they're not caves at all, but constructed entryways into underground facilities or hidden chambers. This theory got a boost in 2009 when Japan's Kaguya lunar orbiter discovered a deep, cylindrical hole over 250 feet wide and 300 feet deep. NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter later confirmed it. Scientists say it's likely part of a lava tube, but believers wonder if it's something more. Could this be an entry point into something built, not formed? Let's not forget about the far side of the moon, which we never see from Earth. It's been photographed extensively by satellites and orbiters, but access to high-resolution images of certain areas has been limited. Some claim that image sets have gaps, missing files, or strange inconsistencies. This has led to speculation that certain regions may contain things NASA, and possibly other space agencies, don't want us to see. One of the most circulated claims involves an image labeled AS1713520680, taken during Apollo 17. In the background, a faint cube-shaped structure seems to emerge from the horizon. NASA says it's a photographic defect, possibly lens flare or debris. But many believe it's something more. Online forums and documentaries have picked it apart for years. And then there's the Luna 9 incident, which fuels curiosity even further. The Soviet Luna 9 probe made the first successful soft landing on the moon in 1966. The photographs it transmitted back were quickly made public, but rumors circulated that the initial images showed strange vertical objects in the distance. These were said to resemble upright pillars or machinery. Official sources dismissed these claims as distortions or damage to the signal. But again, once the idea is out there, it's hard to put back in the box. Perhaps the most controversial claim comes from former NASA insiders. Ken Johnston, a former consultant to NASA, has said publicly that he saw photographs of structures on the moon before they were sanitized for public release. He claims to have witnessed NASA technicians airbrushing out objects that looked artificial. Like others, Johnston has been criticized and dismissed by skeptics. But to believers, he's a whistleblower revealing a cover-up. So what could these alleged structures be? Believers offer several possibilities. Some think they're ancient alien outposts, maybe built for observation, scientific study, or even contact. Others think the moon could be a kind of ark or archive, holding information or technology left behind by a long-gone civilization. A few believe the moon itself might be artificial, and these structures are simply parts of its internal systems poking through the surface. Of course, none of these claims have been officially verified, and critics rightly point out that until we send people back, or robots capable of detailed analysis, these questions will remain unanswered. Light and shadow can play tricks on even the most trained eyes, and digital image enhancement, often used to highlight supposed anomalies, can introduce distortions of its own. Still, the fact remains. People are seeing things that don't quite make sense. And while many of these anomalies may turn out to be rocks, shadows, or photographic quirks, others defy easy explanation. The moon is covered in mystery, not just in myths and stories, but in actual pixels and patterns that we can see for ourselves. In the end, the debate isn't just about whether structures exist. It's about the possibility that the moon has a deeper story than we've been told. Maybe it's a relic. Maybe it's still in use. Or maybe we just haven't looked close enough. In the next chapter, we'll explore the idea that the moon isn't just a passive object, but an active one. Could it be watching us? And if so, who or what is behind the gaze? Chapter 9. The moon as an observation platform. We tend to think of the moon as a quiet neighbor, a silent companion glowing in the night sky. But what if it's not just sitting there? What if it's watching us? This idea that the moon could be functioning as some sort of observation platform or surveillance station might sound like science fiction at first. But for those who believe the moon is not entirely natural, it's a logical next step. After all, if the moon was placed intentionally, there had to be a reason, and observing Earth would be a pretty good one. Let's consider the basics. The moon is the only celestial body that remains locked in perfect view of our planet. Because of tidal locking, we only ever see one face of it. The far side remains out of sight from the ground, forever turned away. But the side we do see, it's always there, always watching. From a strategic perspective, the moon is an ideal vantage point. It provides a clear, uninterrupted view of Earth. Anything orbiting or occurring on the surface, weather patterns, migrations, cities lighting up at night, could be monitored from there without much difficulty. No satellites needed, no signal relays, just a front row seat to the planet below. Now, let's add in some technological context. If we, as a civilization, just a few hundred years into the industrial age, already have satellites, drones, and space telescopes, what could a far older or more advanced intelligence do? If a civilization thousands or millions of years ahead of us wanted to monitor Earth without interfering directly, the moon would be the perfect perch. Believers point to this logic as one of the reasons they think the moon may have been placed, not just to stabilize Earth's tilt or help develop life, but to keep an eye on it. Maybe to gather data, maybe to protect, maybe even to control in subtle ways we don't yet understand. There are also modern parallels. Military strategists and private companies have proposed building lunar observatories and bases because of the moon's unique position. The idea of using the moon as a surveillance post is already on the table, even among today's defense planners. So the concept isn't as far-fetched as it might seem. Let's talk about the lunar mascons, short for mass concentrations. These are oddly dense areas beneath the moon's surface, discovered when spacecraft orbiting the moon were pulled slightly off course. Scientists explain them as remnants of ancient asteroid impacts that compacted the crust, but some believers think they could be technology embedded deep underground, perhaps powering something or collecting information. Others point to the unusual electromagnetic signals that have been detected near the moon over the years. Some of these have no clear explanation and don't match known natural sources. Could they be the byproducts of hidden systems? Instruments buried under layers of rock? Or are they just noise we haven't fully decoded? Then there's the curious fact that the moon appears to have certain rhythmic effects on human biology and behavior. While this isn't surveillance in the traditional sense, it's worth mentioning. Emergency rooms report spikes in activity during full moons. Police departments around the world have noted similar patterns. Ancient cultures saw the moon as not just a light in the sky, but a force that influenced emotion, fertility, and even mental health. Could that be part of the design? If the moon was placed here, maybe it was meant not just to observe us, but to subtly influence us. Some believers even propose that the moon could be transmitting low-frequency signals, not to harm, but to guide or regulate. It's a controversial idea, but one that shows up frequently in conspiracy circles. Skeptics say this is all a stretch. Mascons are well studied. The moon's effects on biology are anecdotal, and no one has found a camera, antenna, or relay dish sitting on a lunar ridge. All true. But as believers point out, if a surveillance system were placed on the moon by an advanced civilization, it wouldn't be something we'd easily find. It would likely be buried. It might operate at frequencies we can't yet detect. Or it could be dormant, waiting for a reason to wake up. The moon's strange quakes, called moonquakes, add another layer of intrigue. Some of these quakes happen deep underground and don't seem to be caused by meteor impacts or temperature changes. Could something be shifting underneath? Could these be signs of internal activity, either natural or artificial? Then there's the enduring mystery of the Apollo mission's radio blackouts on the far side. When the spacecraft went behind the moon, they lost all communication with Earth. That's expected. Radio signals can't go through the moon. But some believe that during these blackouts, things were seen or experienced that were never shared with the public. Whispers of strange lights, unknown transmissions, or even encounters have followed the Apollo program ever since. Again, none of this is confirmed. But the fact that the moon offers a natural surveillance advantage, combined with its tidal locking, orbit, and possible anomalies, makes it hard for some to ignore the possibility. If we were to build an observation post to watch a developing species, the moon would be a textbook location. So who then would be watching? That's where theories diverge. Some say it's aliens, perhaps the same ones who visited ancient Earth. Others believe it could be remnants of an ancient civilization from our own solar system, now long gone, but still monitoring the outcome of their experiment. A few even think it might be a cosmic failsafe put in place by creators we've never met. To skeptics, this all falls under the umbrella of speculative fiction. They point out the lack of hard evidence. No transmitters, no power sources, no observable machinery. They argue that the moon's orbit, size, and behavior can all be explained with current physics and astronomy. But to believers, the patterns are too precise, the placement too perfect, and the timing too convenient to brush off. They argue that science is a process, and just because we haven't found the equipment doesn't mean it isn't there. It just means we haven't looked deeply enough. In the end, whether the moon is an artificial eye in the sky or just a lucky coincidence of nature, it raises a question worth asking. If someone were watching us, would we even know? In the next chapter, we'll explore what happens when people start talking. Former astronauts, insiders, and whistleblowers who claim they saw things that didn't match the official story. Because sometimes the silence around the moon is louder than anything ever said. Chapter 10. Testimonies from astronauts and insiders. For all the data, photographs, and scientific findings about the moon, one thing that keeps the conspiracy theories alive isn't just what we've seen. It's what people have said. More specifically, what astronauts and insiders have hinted at over the years. From cryptic interviews to outright claims, the words of those who were there, or close to the action, have added fuel to the idea that the moon may be more than it appears. Let's start with the astronauts. Few people have been closer to the moon than those who actually walked on its surface. So when they speak, people listen. And while most of them stick to official narratives, some have made comments that believers latch onto. Take Buzz Aldrin, the second man to walk on the moon. In several interviews, Aldrin has spoken about seeing a UFO during the Apollo 11 mission. He later clarified that it was likely part of the spacecraft or a panel that had detached, but the initial reports sparked curiosity. Then there was his comment about monoliths on Phobos, a moon of Mars. Aldrin once said, "We should visit the moon of Mars. There's a monolith there. When people find out about that, they're going to say, 'Who put that there? Who put that there?'" Was he being metaphorical? Was it a figure of speech? Perhaps. But to those who already suspect there's more to the story, it sounded like a breadcrumb. Then there's Edgar Mitchell, the sixth man to walk on the moon. After leaving NASA, Mitchell became a vocal advocate for the study of consciousness, paranormal activity, and extraterrestrial life. He repeatedly stated that he believed we have been visited by other civilizations, and that governments were covering it up. While he didn't claim to have seen aliens on the moon, his words gave legitimacy to the idea that not everything was being shared with the public. In an interview, Mitchell said, "I happen to have been privileged enough to be in on the fact that we've been visited on this planet, and the UFO phenomenon is real." Coming from a former astronaut, that kind of statement carries weight. Another intriguing figure is Neil Armstrong. While he was famously private and careful with his words, some believers point to his speech at the White House in 1994 as unusually cryptic. In it, he said, "There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers." For many, it sounded like he was hinting at a bigger reality hidden behind official accounts. Others say it was just poetic language meant to inspire. But Armstrong's rumored statements go beyond public speeches. Some conspiracy theories claim that during the Apollo 11 mission, Armstrong and Aldrin saw something on the moon, possibly structures or unidentified craft, but were ordered not to report it. These claims often refer to missing audio or transmissions on secret radio channels. NASA has denied these stories, and no solid evidence has emerged. Still, the rumors persist. And it's not just astronauts. Contractors, engineers, and technicians have come forward with stories of their own. We mentioned Carl Wolf in Chapter 7, a former U.S. Air Force technician who claimed he was shown high-resolution images of the moon's far side that included artificial-looking structures. He said the technician who showed him the images seemed nervous, telling him, "We've found a base on the backside of the moon." Wolf went public with his story decades later, and although it's never been verified, he stuck to it until his death. Another insider, Donna Hare, worked in NASA's photo labs and alleges that she saw photos being altered to remove objects, particularly unidentified ones, from images before they were released to the public. She also claimed that some employees who asked questions about these images were threatened or silenced. There's also Ken Johnston, a former NASA contractor who claims he was instructed to destroy certain images taken during the Apollo missions, but instead kept some of them. He says the photos showed things on the moon that didn't look natural, structures, shapes, or shadows that didn't belong. Skeptics dismiss these stories as unreliable. They argue that memories fade, people misinterpret what they see, and some may simply want attention. And it's true that in the world of whistleblowers, there's always a risk of exaggeration or misinformation. But for believers, it's not about proving any single story. It's about patterns. When multiple people, across different roles, years, and locations, describe similar things, it starts to sound less like coincidence and more like a puzzle waiting to be solved. Believers also point out how tight-lipped many astronauts have been about their experiences. Armstrong, for example, rarely gave interviews. Others were similarly quiet or deflected questions about what they saw. Was it just personal preference? Or was there something they weren't allowed to say? Some suggest that astronauts may have been bound by non-disclosure agreements, especially during a time when the Cold War was in full swing and any unknown sighting could be considered a matter of national security. There's no official record confirming this, but it's not outside the realm of possibility. And then there's the cultural shift. In recent years, we've seen more openness around the topic of UFOs and unexplained aerial phenomena. The U.S. government has even confirmed the authenticity of some footage and acknowledged ongoing investigations. If that door is opening, some believe that revelations about the moon might not be far behind. In the end, the testimonies of astronauts and insiders don't prove that the moon is artificial or that it hides alien structures. But they do keep the conversation alive. Because when the people closest to the truth hint that we don't have the full story, it's hard not to listen. In the next chapter, we'll explore perhaps the biggest question of all. If the moon was placed, then by whom? And for what purpose? Chapter 11. Who put the moon there? And why? If we entertain the possibility that the moon didn't just end up in its perfect spot by coincidence, that it was placed with intent, then one big question naturally follows. Who did it, and why? At this stage, the idea that the moon was placed by an intelligent force has already woven itself through everything we've explored. From its exact size and orbit, to its strange composition, seismic behavior, and eerie alignment with Earth and the Sun, the theory isn't that it's a regular satellite. It's that the moon might be more like a construct, a piece of intentional design. But that leaves us wondering, what kind of beings would be capable of doing something like that? Let's start with the most common theory among believers: extraterrestrial intelligence. The universe is massive, containing billions of galaxies, each with billions of stars and likely even more planets. Statistically, It would be arrogant to assume that Earth is the only planet that has ever hosted intelligent life. So if we accept the possibility of advanced civilizations elsewhere, it's not unreasonable to ask whether one of them might have been here before us. Some point to the Anunnaki, a race of beings mentioned in ancient Sumerian texts. According to interpretations popularized by authors like Zecharia Sitchin, the Anunnaki were extraterrestrials who came to Earth thousands of years ago and may have influenced early human civilization. Some versions of the theory suggest the moon was brought into Earth's orbit by the Anunnaki to create a stable environment, or even to observe and control the development of humanity. Others think the moon could be a product of a now extinct, ancient galactic civilization, one that seeded life across different planets and left behind technological remnants like the moon as part of a grand experiment. This idea, while speculative, tries to answer one key question. If someone put the moon there, where are they now? The answer may be that they're long gone, and the moon is simply the last piece of their work still in use. A more grounded version of the theory suggests that the moon wasn't necessarily built from scratch, but rather hollowed out or modified. Some researchers have proposed that a natural satellite was captured and then altered by intelligent beings, creating a kind of hybrid structure, part natural rock, part technology. That might explain the moon's dense outer crust, lighter interior, and strange seismic properties. Now let's talk motives. If someone did put the moon there, why would they do it? The first theory is planetary stabilization. Earth's tilt is kept in check by the moon, which helps maintain a relatively steady climate. Without the moon, our planet might wobble dramatically, making long-term habitability difficult. If an advanced civilization was interested in fostering life here, whether as caretakers, observers, or experimenters, they might have introduced the moon to ensure stable conditions. Another possibility is observation and data collection. As we discussed in Chapter 9, the moon is perfectly positioned to observe everything happening on Earth. From its locked orbit, it can constantly monitor the same hemisphere. If it's part of an ancient surveillance system, or even a kind of galactic watchtower, then its role would be to gather information on Earth's development, possibly without interference. There's also the terraforming theory. This idea suggests that the moon played an active role in making Earth suitable for life. By influencing ocean tides, atmospheric patterns, and possibly even Earth's rotation rate, the moon could have been a critical component in preparing the planet for biology as we know it. In this context, the moon is not just an observer, but a tool. Some even go further, proposing that the moon might serve as a control mechanism, not just for the environment, but for human behavior. The moon's cycles have been tied to everything from fertility to emotion to mental health. While most of this is still debated in scientific circles, the fact that the moon affects the tides, and by extension, every living organism that evolved in the ocean, is undisputed. Could it also be emitting subtle frequencies that influence us more directly? Believers think it's possible. Another bold theory suggests the moon might be part of a quarantine system. In this version of events, Earth is being monitored, but also isolated. The moon's presence helps manage what happens on our planet, ensuring that whatever takes place here doesn't affect the broader galaxy. This is often called the zoo hypothesis, the idea that Earth is part of a protected zone, watched but not interfered with. And then there's the spiritual interpretation. Some believe the moon has a symbolic or energetic role, not just physical, but metaphysical. Ancient cultures associated the moon with intuition, dreams, and cycles of transformation. In some traditions, It was thought to be a gateway to other dimensions or planes of consciousness. Could it be a tool for more than just planetary physics? Perhaps a kind of tuning fork for spiritual evolution? Of course, all of this is speculative. But that doesn't mean it's without grounding. The patterns we've observed, mathematical, physical, cultural, are real. The question is what they mean. Skeptics argue that the moon's traits, while unusual, can be explained by natural processes. They point to theories like the giant impact hypothesis to explain how it formed, and claim that any perfect alignments we see are coincidences or the result of observational bias. But for believers, the question remains, why is everything so precise? Why does the moon fit just right in the sky? Why does it regulate Earth so perfectly? Why do so many ancient cultures describe the moon as arriving or being placed? Some say we'll never know. Others believe we're getting closer to the truth. As space agencies and private companies plan to return to the moon in the coming years, some hope that we'll finally start uncovering the answers. Will we find evidence buried beneath the surface? Will high-resolution scans reveal what earlier missions missed or weren't allowed to share? Or will we simply learn to look at the moon with new eyes? In the final chapter, we'll explore where all this leads. Because the question isn't just whether the moon was placed, it's what we'll do with that possibility, now that we're ready to ask it out loud. Chapter 12. The Road Ahead. Will we discover the truth? By now, we've looked at nearly every angle of the moon conspiracy theory, from strange alignments and unexplained seismic behavior to whispers from astronauts and ancient legends. The core idea that the moon may have been placed intentionally by some form of advanced intelligence might seem wild at first. But for those who've taken a closer look, the evidence is strange enough to at least raise eyebrows, and maybe even questions. So where do we go from here? In the past, this kind of topic was dismissed out of hand. Talking about aliens, artificial moons, or hidden surveillance systems got you laughed out of the room. But today, that's changing. Governments are openly admitting that there are aerial phenomena they can't explain. Former military officials are testifying before Congress about unidentified objects. Public curiosity is no longer fringe, it's mainstream. This shift matters, because if the moon really does hold secrets, it's likely that new discoveries will come not from speculation, but from exploration. And there's a lot of exploration coming. Right now, both national space agencies and private companies have plans to return to the moon. NASA's Artemis program aims to put humans back on the lunar surface in the next few years. China has already landed rovers and intends to build a permanent base. Other countries, including India and Russia, are expanding their lunar programs. Even SpaceX and Blue Origin are developing systems for moon missions. In short, the moon is about to get busy again, and believers are paying attention. One hope is that new missions will provide higher resolution scans and deeper analyses of lunar soil, seismic data, and orbital patterns. The more we study the moon, the more likely we are to find anomalies we missed or ignored the first time around. Some believe we might uncover buried technology, unusual metals, or signs of excavation that suggest the moon has been tampered with or altered in the past. Another possibility is that future astronauts will experience something similar to what earlier Apollo crews hinted at. Strange lights, unexplained transmissions, or unexpected feelings while on the moon's surface. As long as there are boots on the ground and eyes in the sky, there's a chance that someone might stumble upon something we weren't supposed to see. But what happens if we do find something? This is where things get more complicated. Let's say evidence comes to light, real, undeniable evidence, that the moon isn't what we thought, that it was placed there by an intelligent force long before humans were writing history books. What would that do to our understanding of science, religion, and civilization? Believers often say that it's not just about proving the moon is artificial. It's about how humanity will respond if that turns out to be true. Will we be ready to rethink everything, from our cosmic origins to our purpose on this planet? Or will we try to cover it up again, afraid of what the truth might mean? Some point to how we've handled other big discoveries in history: heliocentrism, evolution, the Big Bang. Each time, the truth was resisted, debated, and finally accepted. But it wasn't easy. Paradigm shifts never are. And if the moon turns out to be part of a designed system, then we're looking at possibly the biggest paradigm shift in human history. There's also the question of disclosure. If governments or agencies already know something, will they ever tell us? Believers often point to the secrecy around space programs, the redacted documents, and the behavior of astronauts who seem to know more than they could say. Until there's transparency, suspicions will continue to grow. But not all hope lies in official hands. One of the most exciting parts of this era is how citizen science is evolving. Amateur astronomers, independent researchers, and digital sleuths are doing work that once required government funding. From analyzing NASA photo archives to tracking lunar anomalies via telescope, more people than ever are part of the search. In fact, several strange discoveries, like odd shadows or geometric shapes on the moon's surface, came from outsiders who just happened to be looking at the right image at the right time. This is important, because if the truth is hidden in plain sight, then maybe it doesn't take an insider to find it. Maybe it just takes someone willing to look and ask the right questions. Of course, some may never be convinced. There will always be those who view any mention of a moon conspiracy as pure fantasy. And that's fair. Healthy skepticism keeps things balanced. But there's a difference between skepticism and refusal to consider new ideas. For believers, the point isn't to abandon science, it's to push it further, to open the door to questions that mainstream academia doesn't always want to ask. Questions like, why does the moon's orbit seem so precisely tuned? Why are ancient cultures obsessed with its arrival? Why do certain photos and data appear to have been edited or withheld? These aren't just sci-fi musings. They're patterns, and patterns deserve to be studied. In the end, maybe the moon will turn out to be a natural object with just enough weirdness to stir the imagination. Or maybe, just maybe, it will be the key to understanding something far greater about the universe, our origins, and what it means to be human. What matters most is that we keep asking, keep wondering, keep looking up. Because if there really is more to the moon than meets the eye, then this story isn't over. It's just beginning.